Good afternoon from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking at a live view of the rainy spaceport here on Florida Space Coast this afternoon, where SpaceX is targeting launch of a Falcon 9 rocket at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Time, that is 8:54 p.m. UTC, on a resupply mission to the International Space Station. However, as you can see, is obvious in this view, it is a dreary afternoon here in Florida, with some light rainfall currently at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as some low cloud cover. Right now, the weather parameters are not looking favorable for launch today. There is a 90% probability of unacceptable weather at the time of the instantaneous launch opportunity this afternoon. Again, that is at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Time, 8:54 p.m. UTC. There are multiple weather rules currently in violation for cloud cover, as well as disturbed weather and the precipitation that is falling here at Kennedy Space Center at this hour. The precipitation is not usually a factor or an issue for most launches. However, this mission is carrying a Dragon cargo capsule, which has a heat shield on it to allow it to re-enter the atmosphere at the end of its mission. And for missions with capsules like Dragon or Orion or Starliner, Boeing's crew capsule, there is a restriction to launching. They're unable to launch when there's rainfall, because those rain droplets could impact that heat shield and potentially damage it as the rocket accelerates up through the atmosphere. So multiple weather issues currently at the Kennedy Space Center for launch this afternoon. In this view, provided from a camera on a nearby SpaceX facility looking north toward Pad 39A, you can see on the right, or actually in the center of the frame, is the Starship launch tower that's has been constructed back during the summer to support future flights of SpaceX's Super Heavy and Starship rocket from here in Florida. Construction and outfitting of that tower continues. Off to the left, if you look closely, you can see the outline of the Pad 39A fixed service structure. And just to the right of that, very, very faint but slightly visible in this view, is the Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon spacecraft vertical in preparation for the launch opportunity today. The countdown is now at about 65 minutes, an hour and 5 minutes from the instantaneous launch opportunity this afternoon. Here's another shot of the Pad 39A area, just the faint outline of the Pad 39A fixed service structure in this view, visible in this view from this angle. And here's one more shot looking at Pad 39A, a slightly closer look at it. You can see the Starship tower with the crane there, and the shorter structure off to the left is the Falcon 9 rocket and the Pad 39A fixed service structure. And off to the left, just above the tree line, is the SpaceX hangar, where the Falcon 9 was assembled for flight on this space station resupply mission. You see some raindrops here on this camera. We're continuing to see some light rainfall here at the Space Center as the countdown approaches the T-minus 1 hour mark. This mission is carrying about 7,700 pounds, or about 3.5 metric tons of supplies, experiments, and hardware up to the International Space Station. These include new rollout solar arrays that will be installed on the space station's power truss and unfurled potentially as soon as next week if this launch gets off today, with the assistance of astronauts that are going outside the space station on spacewalks. There are also numerous experiments on board this mission. One of those will investigate the growth of dwarf tomatoes in microgravity on board the space station. That'll be a first. They've grown leafy green vegetables in a plant growth laboratory on the ISS before. This mission carries up an experiment to try to grow dwarf tomatoes. This gives the space station crew fresh food during their long-duration stays in orbit, and will help demonstrate techniques for future plant growth on longer-duration deep space expeditions as well, such as flights to the Moon or Mars. The Dragon spacecraft is also packed with 8 small CubeSat payloads. These will be deployed outside the International Space Station through the Japanese airlock mechanism later this year. These CubeSats come from science teams and companies in the United States, Canada, Italy, and Taiwan. This is the first of 2 Falcon 9 missions slated for launch today, but weather could be a factor for both of them. The forecast for both launches calls for a 90% probability of unacceptable or unfavorable weather conditions. The other launch of a Falcon 9 is scheduled a few miles down the coast from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station tonight at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 2:57 a.m. UTC for those of you watching in other time zones around the world. That Falcon 9 rocket is set to launch a Eutelsat broadband communications satellite. That launch was actually scheduled for last night. SpaceX scrubbed that launch a couple of hours before the target liftoff time to perform additional checkouts on the vehicle or some other system at the pad. We're not sure. There were no details offered by SpaceX on the exact cause of that scrub, but they said they're going to perform additional checkouts, and they're targeting a launch tonight. But again, the weather will be a factor for that mission as well. So at 62 minutes before the target launch time for SpaceX's CRS-26 cargo mission to the space station, we'll continue to stream these live views of Pad 39A. We'll be back with a further update shortly. Now, T-minus 60 minutes until the instantaneous launch opportunity today for the CRS-26 mission, SpaceX's 26th cargo delivery mission to the International Space Station. We're continuing to stream live views from Kennedy Space Center as we're now inside of an hour until that target launch time. Rainfall continues at the spaceport at this time. If you're just joining us and you haven't done so yet, please hit the like button on our YouTube stream here. That helps us gain a larger audience for our coverage. We want to bring this to as many people as possible, and you can help us do that by hitting the like button here on our YouTube stream. That really helps us a lot. The next major milestone in the countdown will be at about T-minus 38 minutes, about 21 minutes from now. At that point, SpaceX's launch team in the firing room over at the Launch Control Center will be polled for their readiness to proceed into the final 35-minute countdown automatic sequence. They'll review the status of the Falcon 9 ground systems, the Dragon spacecraft, and the weather before giving that go or no-go to proceed into the T-minus 35-minute mark. At that T-minus 35-minute point in the countdown will be governed by an automatic computer sequencer for that final 35 minutes until liftoff, and at the same time, loading of propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket will begin. Kerosene and liquid oxygen will be filled or loaded into the Falcon 9 first stage and second stage in the final 35 minutes of the countdown. In total, about 1 million pounds of those propellants will be pumped into the vehicle. Again, the mission today if the weather allows, is to launch a Dragon cargo capsule to the International Space Station. SpaceX's countdown is at T-minus 42 minutes, 18 seconds, and counting. We're about 4 minutes away from the time at which we expect to hear word from SpaceX on whether they're going to proceed with the launch attempt of the rest of the countdown this afternoon. As you can see, the weather conditions have not improved appreciably here at Kennedy Space Center in the last few minutes, with gray skies, some light rain, low clouds over the spaceport. Weather conditions continue to be observed red at this time for multiple rules involving cloud cover and the rain. And the latest forecast that we've seen from the 45th Weather Squadron from the Space Force indicated a 90% chance of unfavorable weather for this afternoon's instantaneous launch attempt at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 8:54 p.m. UTC. That is about 41 minutes away. If the teams give a go to proceed into the final countdown at T-minus 35 minutes, that'll be when propellants begin flowing into the two-stage Falcon 9 rocket. About 1 million pounds of those liquid oxygen and kerosene propellants will be loaded. This view from
Launch Director Countdown Net, polling ready for propellant load and launch go no-go poll, step 5972. Our intention at this point is to proceed into propellant load while we continue to evaluate weather. Please indicate readiness in the EPROC step.
T-minus 40 minutes, 35 seconds. You just heard the voice from SpaceX Launch Control indicating that the intention at this point is to proceed into that 35-minute countdown sequence and begin loading propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket, assuming all other parameters are acceptable. All technical parameters are acceptable. That poll is underway. They continue evaluating the weather. Again, it does not look favorable for launch today, but SpaceX isn't giving up hope yet, with weather conditions still red at this time. T-minus 40 minutes.
Countdown. Polling is complete. We're go for propellant load and launch. On CountdownNet, reminder of abort instructions. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief CE or LD, and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operator shall call hold on the CountdownNet. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence immediately and proceed into the launch abort auto. T-minus 10 seconds, launch control be hands off and relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count.
Launch auto sequence has started.
T-minus 35 minutes. The launch auto sequence has started, as you just heard from the SpaceX Launch Control. So the countdown is now running off a computer sequencer. At T-minus 60 seconds, that'll be the time that the Falcon 9's onboard computer takes control of the countdown. So SpaceX has elected to begin loading propellants into the Falcon 9 rocket this afternoon in hopes that weather conditions improve enough to permit liftoff at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8:54 p.m. UTC. However, three weather rules are currently observed red. They're in violation of weather criteria at this time. And the picture kind of tells a story with some light rain and poor visibility and low clouds currently at Kennedy Space Center. If this rocket is able to take off at 3:54 p.m. today, the Dragon cargo capsule is scheduled to dock at the International Space Station at 5:57 a.m. Eastern Time, 10:57 UTC tomorrow. It'll be docking with the Harmony module on the International Space Station to begin a stay of about 45 days. If the launch were to occur today, the scheduled departure date for the Dragon spacecraft from the space station would be January the 7th. Following that would be a splashdown of the Dragon capsule off the coast of Florida. T-minus 32 minutes and counting. If you're just joining us and you haven't done so, please hit the like button on our YouTube stream. That helps us gain a larger audience for our coverage as we count down to the potential launch of a Falcon 9 rocket at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Time from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This mission is designated CRS-26. That's Commercial Resupply Services number 26. It's the 26th cargo mission to the space station performed by SpaceX, which has a multi-billion-dollar cargo resupply contract with NASA that currently covers missions up through CRS-35. That is scheduled to fly in the 2026 timeframe. That contract is likely to be extended throughout the remaining life of the space station, which NASA is currently targeting for 2030. This mission is carrying 7,700 pounds, or about 3.5 metric tons of cargo to the space station, including experiments and some fresh food for the 7-person crew on board the space station. Inside the Dragon spacecraft's unpressurized compartment are 2 rollout solar arrays. These are called the ISS Rollout Solar Arrays, or iROSA units. These are the second pair of 3 pair, so numbers 3 and 4 of a total of 6 iROSA units that have been developed by a company called Redwire. They were developed by a company called Deployable Space Systems, which was later acquired by Redwire. And then the contract was then awarded by Boeing to Redwire for these solar arrays, and Boeing has the contract to perform maintenance and engineering support of the space station. So a contract chain there from NASA to Boeing to Redwire for these 2 solar array units. This video from NASA shows actually the first 2 iROSA units, which were launched last year, undergoing their preparations for launch inside the space station processing facility here at Kennedy Space Center. So the process, the procedures to prepare the second pair, which are launching on this mission, was very much the same. So this video is kind of representative of what type of work went on inside the space station processing facility, and you can get a feel for the size and appearance of these 2 iROSA solar arrays, which are launched actually spooled up on these 2 rolls, and they roll out like a yoga mat once they are mounted outside the International Space Station on board the solar power truss. These 2 solar arrays, the launching on this mission, are iROSA number 3 and 4. As I mentioned, they're going on board the one is going on the starboard side truss, the right side truss of the space station. The other will go on the port side or left side truss of the space station. And astronauts are preparing for a pair of spacewalks next week, assuming the launch gets off today, to assist in the attachment, mounting, and the deployment of these 2 rollout solar arrays. We're now seeing a view from a SpaceX camera inside the perimeter fence of Pad 39A, looking at the Falcon 9 rocket, which stands 215 feet or 65 meters in height in this configuration with the Dragon spacecraft on top. You can see some of the venting and frost vapors there, condensation vapors building up on the outer skin of the first stage of the Falcon 9. This Falcon 9 booster is flying for the first time. It's booster number 1076. The Dragon capsule on top is also new. It's called Dragon 211 in SpaceX's inventory. So an all-new vehicle flying on this CRS-26 mission. SpaceX intends to recover the first stage on a drone ship. The drone ship just read the instructions about 200 miles or 300 kilometers northeast of Kennedy Space Center. That's a bit closer to the shore than most drone ship landings. For this mission, the first stage will perform a partial boost back burn after separating from the second stage to reverse some of its, or cancel out some of its downrange velocity to target a landing closer to shore. That speeds up the time that is necessary to bring the rocket back to Port Canaveral for refurbishment. Now, about 27 minutes, 12 seconds remaining until the launch time, weather permitting, at Kennedy Space Center. T-minus 21 minutes and counting. One of the next milestones we expect to see is the so-called big vent from the strong back at pad 39A. That occurs shortly after the completion of kerosene fuel loading on the second stage of the Falcon 9, which we may hear a call out about that momentarily.
Stage 2, fuel load complete.
And the stage 2 fuel load is complete, so the Falcon 9's upper stage is now fully loaded with kerosene fuel. That is also called RP1, or Rocket Propellant 1. It's a highly refined rocket-grade variant of kerosene. Kerosene loading continues on the first stage. That will continue down until about T-minus 6 minutes or so. As you can see, if you look closely here in this view, you can see the vent from the strong back out at pad 39A. This occurs as the chill down or thermal conditioning of the liquid oxygen transfer line that runs up the strong back gets underway. This chill down or thermal conditioning takes a few minutes and is in preparation for the start of flow of super cold densified liquid oxygen into stage 2 that begins at about T-minus 16 minutes. So the countdown running right on schedule. No technical issues that we've heard at this point in the countdown. The weather remains a factor, though, with weather rules still observed red here at Kennedy Space Center. Here's a nice shot of that venting from the strong back, 18 minutes, 38 seconds until liftoff time.
Stage 2, LOX load has started.
Liquid oxygen loading on stage 2 is now underway. This is the fourth and final propellant tank to be loaded in the SpaceX countdown this afternoon. The weather forecast has slightly improved and now shows a 30% chance of acceptable or go weather at the time of launch. There is an instantaneous launch opportunity this afternoon at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Time, 16 minutes from now. However, weather rules still are observed red or no-go at this time. 3 weather rules are currently exceeding or outside the limits of the Falcon 9's and the range's launch weather criteria. So SpaceX is hopeful that the weather conditions will improve, but the chances are still that the weather will not allow the launch today. But those conditions could evolve and change over the next 15 minutes or so. As I mentioned, this mission is CRS-26. It's the 26th resupply mission to the International Space Station. And one of the main cargo elements on this mission is the next pair of IROSA, or International Space Station Rollout Solar Arrays. This video you're seeing now comes from a test or demonstration of the rollout solar array technology outside the space station back in 2017. You can see this rollout solar array is spooled up at launch to fit inside the trunk of the SpaceX Dragon cargo capsule. They release tension on that roll or spool during the rollout process, and that allows these solar arrays basically to roll out like a yoga mat once they're in place outside the space station. This video comes from the deployment of the first 2 IROSA solar arrays back in June of 2021. We'll see a very similar appearance, very similar process for the rollout of this next pair after they're delivered to the station on CRS-26. These rollout solar arrays are different than conventional solar arrays because the conventional solar arrays fold up like an accordion. These roll out like a yoga mat, as I mentioned. It allows them to fit inside smaller containers and a smaller launch volume. NASA plans to use this rollout solar array technology on the Gateway space station around the moon. It's also was also used by NASA's DART asteroid mission, which impacted an asteroid back at the end of September to demonstrate the planetary defense technique. So this rollout solar array technology was developed by a company called Deployable Space Systems, which is now part of Redwire. And these solar arrays were built at Redwire's factory in Southern California, in Goleta, California. And 2 of these are currently buttoned up for launch inside the trunk of the Dragon cargo capsule on top of the Falcon 9 rocket. 13.5 minutes remaining until the launch opportunity today at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. T-minus 10 minutes and counting. If you're just joining us, you're watching live views from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking at the very top of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket at the Dragon cargo capsule with the U.S. flag and the NASA worm logo on the side. Propellant loading is entering the final stages at Pad 39A. The second stage is already full of kerosene fuel. The first stage is being loaded with kerosene and liquid oxygen right now. Liquid oxygen is also flowing into stage 2 at this time, and in parallel with the propellant loading, cryogenic helium is also being loaded into the vehicle. This provides a pressurant to maintain pressure inside the propellant tanks as that fuel and oxidizer is consumed in flight. 9 minutes, 10 seconds remaining until launch. Still a dreary afternoon here at Kennedy Space Center. In the background, if you look closely, you can see some of the waves breaking on the Atlantic coast and the Starship launch tower positioned just behind the Dragon spacecraft here in this view of Pad 39A. The lower right is the very top of the strongback structure. That will retract to an angle of about 1.5 degrees from the vehicle. You may see that motion here in a few minutes. And you can see some of the quick disconnects and the umbilicals there connecting up to the second stage and the Dragon spacecraft service section. Those will be severed at liftoff when that strongback retracts to allow the Falcon 9 to climb off the pad. 8.5 minutes until launch now. One of the next major milestones in the countdown will be the chill down or thermal conditioning of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the bottom of the Falcon 9's first stage. This chill down involves flowing small amounts of super cold liquid oxygen, chilled to several hundred degrees below zero, through the engine plumbing. This thermally conditions these engines and some of the piping in those engines and leading to those engines against the thermal shock as propellants flow into those engines at ignition. That chill down will begin at T-minus 7 minutes, 30 seconds. Weather continues to be watched closely here at Kennedy Space Center to see if this mission will have a chance to get off the ground today. Three weather rules still red at this time. T-minus 7 minutes and counting. After liftoff, the Falcon 9 will be heading on a trajectory to the northeast from Kennedy Space Center, lining up with the orbital track of the International Space Station. SpaceX's drone ship, just read the instructions, is positioned about 200 miles or about 300 kilometers downrange in the Atlantic Ocean, roughly due east of Jacksonville, Florida. That's where the first stage booster will target a landing about 7.5 minutes after liftoff.
Stage 1, fuel load complete.
The second stage will continue into orbit with the Dragon cargo capsule. And we just heard the call from SpaceX Launch Control that the kerosene fuel load on the first stage of the Falcon 9 has been completed. So about 46,000 gallons of rocket-grade kerosene has been loaded into the Falcon 9 this afternoon. Liquid oxygen continues flowing into the vehicle for another few minutes. The liquid oxygen system will be secured for flight at about T-minus 2 minutes. Also at this time in the countdown, final checks are underway on the navigation systems on the Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon spacecraft. The Dragon spacecraft will be switched to internal power in at about T-minus 5 minutes.
Dragon is in terminal count.
We've heard the call that Dragon is in terminal count, so it's being transitioned to launch mode and internal power. In the next few moments, we should see the strong back begin retracting from the Falcon 9 rocket. That process begins with the opening of clamps that encircle the second stage of the Falcon 9. And then we'll see that strong back recline about 1.5 degrees from the vehicle. T-minus 4 minutes.
Launch director in the countdown net. Our launch weather officer has received his final set of data for today's launch attempt and is no-go for the opportunity. From a launch management standpoint, we will continue the count for the purposes of simplicity with our automation, and we'll stop at T-minus 60 seconds, at which time launch control will say the 3 magic words and end the launch attempt. So for now, clock will continue to count for an additional 2.5 minutes.
We heard the call there from SpaceX's launch director that the CRS-26 mission will not be launching today. No huge surprise given the weather conditions here at Kennedy Space Center. The Falcon 9 countdown will be continuing for a couple more minutes down to about T-minus 60 seconds, and we'll hold there. But again,
Stage 1, locked load complete.
Confirmation received that the launch will not be happening today due to poor weather at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Again, the main weather concerns this afternoon here at Kennedy Space Center have involved precipitation, rainfall, as well as cloud cover, which could trigger lightning as the Falcon 9 climbs through the atmosphere. With this launch not happening today, the next launch opportunity for the CRS-26 resupply mission will be no earlier than Saturday at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is 19:20 or 7:20 p.m. UTC. The launch will not be able to occur over the next few days due to restrictions from the Federal Aviation Administration, which maintains airspace. And, of course, the Thanksgiving holiday is Thursday here in the U.S. That's a very busy travel period. And the FAA has...
Stage 2, locked load complete.
Wants to ensure airspace around the country, including around the Kennedy
Dragon
Space
is in
Center,
auto idle.
are free for air travel during this period. We expect the countdown clock to terminate at T-minus 60 seconds. That's the point at which the Falcon 9's auto sequence should begin during the countdown if the count were to proceed for launch.
Hold, hold, hold. Launch abort has started.
And there's the call from SpaceX Launch Control to hold the clock at T-minus 60 seconds. So this ends the countdown for today's launch attempt. Of course, we heard the call a few moments ago from Launch Control that the weather was not going to cooperate for liftoff today. And this CRS-26 cargo mission to the International Space Station is now being rescheduled for no earlier than Saturday at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7:20 p.m. UTC. continue to stream these views from Pad 39A for a bit longer, as long as we receive them. Again, the launch of the CRS-26 cargo mission is not happening today. It's now been rescheduled for Saturday at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7:20 p.m. UTC. That would result in a docking of the Dragon cargo capsule at the ISS at around 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time Sunday. That will be followed by hatch opening to begin unpacking the internal cargo from the Dragon pressurized cargo cabin, and the space station's robot arm will extract the 2 rollout solar arrays from the trunk of the Dragon spacecraft, attach them to the truss of the space station, and that'll set the stage for a pair of spacewalks in early December to install and deploy the 2 new solar arrays. SpaceX's launch team will now oversee the draining of propellants from the Falcon 9 rocket. The rocket was fully loaded for liftoff at 3:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but of course the weather remained no-go for launch, and SpaceX was unable to get the mission off the ground. Another Falcon 9 rocket is currently awaiting a launch opportunity tonight, a few miles down the coast from Pad 39A at Pad 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That launch is scheduled for 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. That's 2:57 a.m. UTC, with the Eutelsat 10B broadband satellite to provide internet connectivity for applications such as in-flight connectivity for airline passengers, as well as maritime communications. So with that, again, the launch of the CRS-26 mission is not happening today. We thank you for joining us for our live coverage of this launch attempt. We'll be back this evening beginning around 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time for the scheduled launch of the Falcon 9 rocket and the Eutelsat 10B satellite a few miles down the coast. That launch is scheduled at 9:57 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, weather permitting. The weather conditions for that launch are also looking fairly unfavorable. The most recent update there showed a 90% chance of unfavorable weather for launch tonight, but as we saw today, the forecast did improve slightly for this afternoon's launch attempt. We'll see if the trend continues for tonight. So again, thanks for joining us. We'll see you later tonight. I'm Stephen Clark reporting live from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Have a great afternoon.